on to talk about caching. So we would just take any piece of content, go to the Sites tab. You'll see that we have a number of caching options here. Now, I want to be, you got to be careful with this because there's a lot of things that are good to cache and there's a lot of things where it would be a really bad idea to cache it. This is probably an example of one you don't want to cache. Your account information. If I were to go in here and change my email address, hit save, but this page was set to be cached, it would reload and my email address wouldn't be changed, and I think that something went wrong. In fact, in the database now, my email address has been changed because this has been cached. It looks the same. So that kind of page like this, the checkout, shopping cart, search page, anything that changes dynamically on a regular basis, you don't want to cache. On the other hand, things like this search bar potentially, or even more so like your footer or your header menu, your portal site menu. The sends logo, this stuff here, that doesn't change from day to day, and it's a perfect candidate for caching. And the way that works basically is, first time the page is loaded in the database, we make, when the HTML is generated, C# will take that HTML that's been fully generated for whatever section of the page is being cached, and it'll stick it into a table in Webfoot. The next time someone needs to load that, it'll check if that cached version exists. If it does, it just pulls out that HTML, sticks it right on the page. It has to, basically doesn't have to do any work. It's a very simple select right out of the table. One select statement with one where clause. And, if you're doing something complicated like generating, generating a catalog could be a lot of work depending on exactly all the variations or that sort of thing. You can save yourself a lot of time by doing this caching. Of course, there's always the browser caching, but this is something separate. This is done in the database. It's visible to the user. But it can be, if you do it in the wrong place, it can cause some major problems, and it can also be very frustrating to try and debug the problem when you don't realize caching is involved. You're trying to make changes, nothing's happening. That being said, if you make any change in the console, all caching for this content item will be deleted. But if you're doing it in a database, let's say, that will happen automatically. You have to do that deliberately. So there's a number of different settings here. Browser cache. If we say no cache, that means we'll tell the browser, don't cache this page. Browsers may or may not listen, but we'll do our best to try and prevent them from doing it. HTML cache is where you control whether or not this is cached in the database, like we just discussed. And then you have a number of settings for determining how the caching happens. So you can say, is it based on a unique URL? So that would mean if this is the exact URL that's put in, we want to make a copy of that, and if this exact URL gets put in again, bring back the same results. So, for example, again, this is one you'd never want to actually cache, but if we do our search, you'll see that when this comes back, you get your content number. We've also got your additional criteria that are put up into the address bar. Now you could have it set so if it's based on unique URL, okay, so if you didn't have it based on unique URL, it would just be anything that has this content number is cached as this version. So take this, you'll stick it into the cache, and then anybody who came to this page, regardless of the rest of the stuff in the URL, would get the same HTML. On the other hand, if it's based on the unique URL, then it'll only be if they have this exact same query string, the exact same URL, that they'll get the same version. You'll notice we're actually sticking in this RND value, which is the big int. It's a randomly generated number we make to absolutely guarantee that search result pages will not be cached either by webfoot caching or by a browser. Okay. Main content page, this only matters if you're talking about a subpage. So for example, you got a subpage that's included in 2 spots, 2 different main pages. You may want to cache one version of the subpage for page 1 and another different version for main page 2. And that can be controlled by this. Subpage link type is one you don't really need to worry about. But user, this says, okay, well, I'm going to cache it based on a specific user. So this is one you might want to do for something like the portal menu. So it knows that for me, I'm going to get these 5 options under my links. I get access to the forums. I'm going to get access to order sheets, and so on. Other people who have no permissions basically at all, but are still able to log in, might get forums and might get log out. If you do your caching based on who that user is, then you'll only cache that version for that user. Another user comes in, you run all the complicated logic again, you create a new version of the HTML, and you store that just for them. So this can be managed directly on the page here, or if your page contains subpages. Let me just find the shell again. When you click on the edit button, you have those same controls here. So you can control whether or not the subpage is cached, when it's attached to the shell, and if so, what are the criteria. And so that's a way that we can improve performance, particularly in cases where we have to do a lot of, for whatever reason, a lot of effort to generate a set of HTML, but it's the same every time. So we don't want to spend all that time using up those database resources just to produce something which is going to be the same every single time we do it.